Good afternoon. Today it's March 8th, Sunday. It's 4:27 in the afternoon. That's a PM. Clocks just got changed except for here in Arizona and a few other smart places that don't change their clocks twice a year. Today's video, educational video, might be one of the most important ones. The title of it is going to be something similar to centralization versus freedom and how that relates to Tartaria, the Tartarian civilization, the great or greater Tartarian civilization that was actually worldwide. It wasn't just up in the Russian area and Mongolia and parts of China. It was actually a worldwide civilization. Probably a lot more recent than what a lot of you out there want to admit to possibilities of. Anyway, centralization. One of the key points here is that, like most things, centralization by itself is not good or bad. It's like a gun. It depends on who's behind it and what it's being used for. Now, I almost hesitate, after thinking about it, whether to even entitle this video Civilization versus Freedom, because that would denote that freedom is the opposite of centralization, but that's not necessarily the case. Like I said, centralization is depending on the type of civilization. I mean, the type of centralization totally depends on who is centralizing it or what is centralizing it. You see, you can have a centralization such as they had in Tartaria that is centralized possibly by the earth itself, Gaia, as some New Agers use the term. The earth having its own soul, or the earth as an entity in the universe itself. So what we might want to look at in this video is the centralization type that you had in Tartaria versus the centralization that you have under the current negative birthright way of life under debt creation. That centralization is the corporate centralization, or the centralization of those elite few families that own this corporation. And as I've said in especially my last video, Straight Talk, most of the governments in the world, especially the Western governments, those governments are not a people's government, even though they're taught to us in schools and in the public media that it is a public government of the people and by the people. No, that's not true. as I've proven in my other videos about how Dun Bradstreet lists Lori Lane as the owner of the county of Pinal, which is a subdivision of the state of Arizona, which is a subdivision of Washington, D.C. These are all corporations and such, and they are listed under the Dun Bradstreet business listings as businesses, as corporations. They have a Dun Bradstreet number. So rather than them being individual entities, individual corporations, they are one big corporation, because that's what incorporating is. It's incorporating under a larger body, a larger entity, such as Washington, D.C., or the inner city of London, or the World Economic Forum. So that's centralization under a negative debt creation system. Whereas Tartaria was a centralization under a earth, I don't want to say governing, but the Tartarian people and the people of a positive administration, a positive way of life, basically what Yahshua HaMashiach, sometimes known as Jesus, attempted to teach the people 2,000 years ago approximately, and other wise men throughout the ages have attempted to teach the people. So you are one with the planet. You are friends with the planet. You don't abuse the planet. You love the planet. And in so loving it, the planet as an entity works in harmony or in resonance with your frequencies. I'm giving a link to a couple of the better videos on Tartaria that are on the YouTube channel. I've picked these out because I think they're more monumental than most of the other videos that are being put out increasingly more so as the subject of Tartaria becomes much more popular every week. As I said before, some of these videos are sprinkled with falsehoods in an attempt to make the whole subject of Tartaria questionable. While I think of it, one of the biggest proofs to me, or smoking gun, about Tartaria existing on a worldwide basis is the clocks, the timepieces that were being built prior to the 1870s, 1850s, thereabouts. One of the greater museum collections in the world was a collection of clocks, of pre-1870 clocks that the Chinese royal family had. And hopefully I'll give a link that has a few pictures of these. The clocks are all very similar, and we are taught in the public, or I shouldn't say public, the school system, the Rockefeller-type school system, that the clockmakers back in the 1800s were a few really intelligent weirdos in Switzerland that designed and built the watches in a little house or a little tiny factory, the watchmakers that they designed. Well, as this video points out, the gears and all the mechanism that make up a clock, a efficient running clock that keeps excellent time, is not as simple as what Hollywood or the news media or the fool system, the Rockefeller fool system, attempts to portray them as. Each one of these cogs, each one of these wheels has to be pretty darn perfectly uniform so that it runs and keeps the proper time with the next gear in the clock. Now, the interesting thing about the museum in China is that all these clocks from around the world from the 1800s are pretty darn close to being almost identical. And anybody with any sense realizes that an entire system was building these clocks, just like clocks would be made today. They're uniform, so they're, in a sense, there's a great industry behind them. They're not a lone clockmaker in Switzerland up in the mountains making these clocks. It's an industry. And since these clocks were collected all over the world, it was a worldwide industry. Some of these other mechanisms, the parts are interchangeable practically, or I don't know, I haven't actually, but they're so similar, and there are reports that a lot of these mechanisms were interchangeable. And this is the same with the architectural styling, whether it's Argentina or Colombia or Cuba or China or Shanghai or Istanbul, Moscow, London, Paris, Frankfurt, Germany, who knows, even Antarctica. The architectural styling from those early periods are pretty darn close to the same thing. And this is true with the pyramid complexes throughout Asia, throughout Europe, North and South America, especially when you get to understand the master measures of the pyramids, you realize that they're identical purposes. They're part of a master grid, a one world greater grid of energy collection and harmony with the earth. They are like a tuning fork. Based in the earth, going down deep into the earth and tying in with the water system, tying in with the complex water system. The more you study it, the more you realize the builders were in total harmony with the earth, with Gaia, and therefore were in harmony with the universe. They were not at war with the earth. They were not at war with the universe. They were not at war with the air. They were not at war with the sea. They were not at war with the land, like the current negative debt creation world of the elite and the Lori Lane types of the world, the Rothschild types of the world, the Fauci and the Bill Gates type of the world, the CIA, breakaway CIA divisions of the world. They were not at war like those corporations are. Especially like the crazy corporate war in Iran now. I want to also point out to the employees of the corporate world, those that are hired by the Lori Lane types of the world, that's your police, your bureaucrats, your code enforcers, the deep state, who don't want to recognize that they are employed by a private party, such as a Lori Lane. They like to think of themselves as good people working and hired by the public, which is not the case, because they come down pretty hard on any people that separate themselves from the contracts with the Lori Lanes. Those who seek freedom rather than a negative centralization through the Lori Lanes, the Rockefellers, and the Rothschilds, etc., etc. The bureaucrats would be far better off if they would welcome the assemblies, welcome the people's government. We could hire a lot of them, especially the non-top level Lori Lane employed persons. Everybody out there needs to realize they would be far better off if they were in harmony with the earth rather than at war with the earth. Same goes for warring sovereign nations that have not joined the banking systems, have not joined totally the Lori Lanes contracts, such as Iran. That's what happened to Libya. They weren't in contract, weren't in compliance with the One World Order. They weren't in compliance with the Western inner city of London. They were not in compliance with the Zionists. I'm not full of hate. I'm trying to point out that the bureaucrats, the employees, the code enforcers would be far better off if they were accepting non-interest charged Federation dollars, such as what the Global Family Group has ready to pay a USA military when they decide that they no longer want to be mercenaries working for the war profit of the Lori Lanes of the world. Because that's what they are. They're mercenaries. They're involved in a mercenary corporate war against Iran. It's nothing really to do with democracy or nuclear weapons. It's all about debt creation. And those same entities, those same subdivision corporations are making the money now, including the stock, some of the stocks in the stock market, the controlled stock market, because we are at war again. So, please realize that it's up to you all out there, all of you, that you would be much further off, much happier, much higher living standards if you were working with a currency that was based on non-interest, non-rent, like what the founding fathers originally established for the United States of America. The Treasury was supposed to issue non-interest bearing, non-usury notes that were based on gold, silver, other trading assets, not based on IOUs, not based on promises that were only ever backed up by a mercenary army or by cops or police forces that were working for the Lori Lanes of the world. Yeah, you cops out there, you need to realize who you're working for. Then you won't be as confused. You won't be arresting people like myself that have come out of the debt-based beast, come out of the corporation, have rescinded, revoked their contracts with the Lori Lanes because those contracts were based on fraud. You were not fully told, it was not disclosed fully to you what contract you were signing when you made out an application for one of these, which, as I said in my last two videos, is to be a constituent, which is the same as a resident, which is the same as a citizen. And a constituent is one who has made a simple agreement to pay the debts of the Lori Lanes, pay the debts of the Faucis, pay the debts of the Bill Gateses, pay the debts of the Rockefellers, the Rothschilds and the other elite families that are the ones that are really in debt because they have caused so much suffering, caused so much sin, caused so much evil on this planet. So they're the ones in debt, and they have fooled you through the through the corporate fool system, through the media which they own, that you must comply to their licensing, because it is their licensing. It's not a public license. I proved with this affidavit that the Department of Motor Vehicle Division of Arizona, this simple affidavit that you can just sign, fill out here. It's really simple. And what this is, it's a non-compliance affidavit to the Federal Real ID Act. And the state of Arizona is a subcontractor to the feds. So it's not a separate entity. They are not free to choose whether to issue these affidavits and offer them to anybody, including illegal aliens that cross the border, to just simply sign, making them a resident or a constituent. Same thing. But guess what? Who am I report that crime to? Who will carry out an investigation and a charging the Lori Lanes, charging the so-called corporate governor, the other officials in the state of Arizona as criminals for not complying with the Federal Real ID Act. It's really simple, but nobody wants to enforce that. Enforcement. That's a big question. A lot of people realize that nothing is being enforced except by the police gun, by the mercenary military. Because I've given it great thought in the last few weeks, and I've come to realize that enforcement for decades, many decades maybe, has strictly been via blackmail. One of the reasons President Nixon was so powerful was that he had his own list of blackmail material that he could blackmail people. J. Edgar Hoover of the FBI was a very powerful individual and was able to enforce his policies not really by the gun, not by the hammer, but by blackmail, because he had a very extensive catalog, book, rooms, buildings full of blackmail material that he used very intelligently or very diabolically to enforce his commands on the people around him and the planet. Look at Jeffrey Epstein. Very good example. Planet-wide. Same thing. He had very substantial blackmailable material. That's why he was so powerful. So if you look at it, is blackmail material the way to enforce right and wrong? It's one of the poorest. You might even call it one of the most evil ways of enforcing the rule of law, even enforcing codes which are not true, real laws. We've got to get back to enforcement of universal laws. And really, that comes, really when you think about it, self-enforcement, and that's what freedom is. Morals, having morals be the top thing, not blackmailable material. That's what the whole secret societies are all based on. The ones in Yale University that all the presidents are members of. Skull and Bones is what I'm trying to think of. One of the ceremonies you go through, I've heard, you lay down in a coffin and you tell all those in the building around you, your fellow bone and skull members, your deepest, darkest secrets that you've kept to yourself all your life. And I don't know how many of those people laying in that coffin realize that they are giving their power to their fellow secret society members. Maybe they do. But you think about that. That's how the negative system operates. That's how Epstein and friends operate. Do we want to operate like that? Or should we bring back a Tartarian civilization that works in harmony with the planet? Things would be a lot better. We could use the earth as an energy grid, just like the Tartarian civilization did, just like the pre-Egyptian civilization did. All the pyramid complexes throughout the world had an energy system that was based on the spinning planet. It was based on the earth as an electric generator, and they just tapped into that electric generator. It wasn't what you'd call free energy, but it couldn't be metered like the Rothschild and Rockefeller empires are metered, where you have to pay for every kilowatt hour that you use. Their control and the people that work for them and the Lori Lanes of the world yeah, couldn't find it. I'd lost my train of thought. They don't necessarily do this totally through greed. They believe that they are on the right track, just like the cops believe that they are on the right track by ticketing and throwing assembly member or anyone who doesn't comply with these and the licenses and have their own identification system that is recorded 24 hours a day and available to anybody that wants to check up on the identity of somebody who's not in contract, not in compliance with the Lori Lanes and the various subdivisions of the federal, i.e. inner city of London. 35 minutes. A lot of civilizations that came after an earlier civilization went to a lot of work to destroy and cover up and fill in the pyramid system so that it would no longer function. The people throughout Russia, when the Bolsheviks took over, filled a lot of the energy gathering grid system with concrete, with Bolshevik concrete. And this one video that I'll give a link to is about how that concrete is breaking down and how the vibrations from an earlier era are beginning to come through, beginning to bleed through, are becoming standing waves once again. In that sense, what that means is the Earth, Gaia, is rising again. That's what the crop circles are all about. Those are the real ones, not the ones that the college students and other people attempt to make, but the real ones. These are our communications, a measuring system, a tuning system that helps tune that area of the land and soil that those crop circles are measured upon. Yeah. A lot of this could come back out and be utilized again if the Lori Lanes would step down. If you people would stop being employed by the Lori Lanes and would seek freedom. Understand, freedom is, in order to be free, you have to be self-responsible. That goes hand in hand. You don't have freedom unless you have self-responsible individuals. Those who are not dependent on the benefits and entitlements of the Lori Lanes, and those who promise to pay some time in a future time, generations from now, $1. Yeah. I better cut this off. It's getting too long. You really have to look at yourself in a mirror and say, what do I want to be a part of? Do I want to be a part of a debt? A Lori Lane type debt? This kind of IOU, promissory note? Or do I want to be a self-reliant responsible, self-governing individual. Bye now. Happy trails. Happy public right-of-way rather than a privately owned right-of-way grid. Bye.